I am Stacia Solomon. I am one of the career services advisors in the Duke Career Center. I want to thank you all for joining us today for 5 career questions with an alum. This event is sponsored by the Duke Postdoctoral Services along with the Graduate School, in addition to Duke Career Services. We are recording today's event just in case you would like to go back and view it. It will be accessible via the Postdoctoral Services YouTube channel at some point. I can't really give you a time frame, but I'm sure that it's going to be available there, and it'll probably be made available as well on the Duke Career Center page. So today we have joining us one of our fabulous alums, and if you will allow me, I will just read his bio, and then we can start to hear from Micah. So Micah Gilmer is a researcher and writer who studies the social technologies of racism and patriarchy, creating how, I'm sorry, excuse me, let me start over. Micah Gilmer is a researcher and writer who studies how the social technologies of racism and patriarchy create inequitable American systems. He works with clients to design research processes, build strong organizational structures, and evaluate impact. Michael led the development of Frontline seminal report, Why We Can't Wait, and contributed to Gender Norms, a key to improving outcomes among young Latinas. His work has positioned Frontline as a national thought leader on issues of race and gender. Micah received his undergraduate degree from UNC Chapel Hill, and he also completed his doctorate in cultural anthropology from Duke University in 2009. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Micah Gilmer. Oh,
Thank you for
everyone
having
can
me.
see. Yes, thank you so much for being with us today. So, as we all know, this is a short session, so we'll just jump right into it. There are 5 questions that these sessions typically cover. So, if you've participated in any of these, then they should all sound the same or very similar at least. So, Micah, let's start with your background. Why don't you take a few minutes and tell us about your background?
Yeah, I think of myself as one a product of the South in the United States, right? That my family is really spans all those experiences. I grew up in Central Florida, outside of Orlando. My mom is from the West Bank of New Orleans, Algiers, Louisiana, and my dad is from Charleston, West Virginia. So we've got the northernmost tip of the South, the southernmost tip of the South, and probably the westernmost regions of the South as well are sort of in my DNA and my background. And I've been here in North Carolina for 20 years now. And so, was part of the culture anthropology program at Duke, and started out doing work on South African hip hop. During the course of my study, changed to a focus around really looking at Black masculinity. So I was hanging out with a bunch of high school football coaches, coaching football at a local high school, and was really interested in how those coaches thought about themselves as Black men, how they were training or transferring masculinity to those boys, and really was trying to think about a way to talk about masculinity for folks that identify as cisgender or gender conforming or whatever terms you want to use, and how they're thinking about masculinity. While I was in, and I guess I'm starting to answer question 2 about how
Go
I
right ahead. Yes.
how I got to do what I do is while I was in graduate school, I actually had an opportunity to work with a longtime friend and collaborator and partner, Marcus Littles, who's the founder of Frontline. So like 3 months in, or maybe 6 months in, he asked me to do a project with them and the Ford Foundation on the Why We Can't Wait report, on the struggles facing Black men and boys. And did that work, had not ever worked for a foundation before, had not ever done a consulting project before, just had some skills as a researcher and some interest in the topic, and really enjoyed the work and really enjoyed the immediate feedback that we got from folks in the field, of folks feeling like this is helpful, this is actionable, these are things that we can move forward on. And that sort of translated into a series of conversations we did across the country with different folks, and eventually led to the launching of the Executive Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and which led to the launching of the My Brother's Keeper initiative at the Obama White House. And so, got to see from it early on how some of the skills and talents and abilities and training that I've had access to could be used to mobilize change in an area. Also, along the way, learned some tough lessons about how it's possible to lose the conversation and sort of win the battle and lose the war around that. I'm happy to talk about that, but that's sort of how I got to do what I'm doing now. And from the very beginning, we knew that we really wanted to talk about more than while we care about the intersection of race and gender. We knew that we had more to say about a variety of things, and so from the very beginning, have been diversifying our work to cover a range of different topics and things that we find of interest.
Wow, that's awesome, Micah. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And you did basically cover the first two questions. So, if there is, this question three is kind of tricky. If there is a typical day in your organization, what does it look like? And, how has COVID impacted what your work looks like right now?
Yeah, there are, I would say, several different types of typical days for me, and I could speak to pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, my work really looked like the majority of my days spent working directly with our teams as we design, execute the work for clients. And then so that was kind of one set of typical days would be me meeting with our internal teams, doing brainstorming, developing deliverables, connecting with clients that we're working with. And then there would be times that I was traveling where I'd be on the road for 2 or 3 days, a couple times a month, and be in person with folks, facilitating day-long trainings, workshops, brainstormings, that kind of stuff. And obviously, post-COVID, that shifted a lot, where my days actually are a little bit more consistent, right? So there's no travel now, which was ate up a lot of time and energy, which has been nice to have back. But my days now are back-to-back Zoom meetings most days. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays are my meeting days, and those are sort of back-to-back meetings usually where we're connecting with clients to help walk them through their processes. Might be helpful to talk a little bit about the kinds of work that we do now. So we really have three core bodies of work. The first one is helping our clients, and those are both like foundations and nonprofit organizations for the most part, learn. So do evaluation work is something that we do a lot of, and particularly what we're really expert at is taking some qualitative research tools like interviews, like conversation with folks, focus groups, things that'll be familiar to y'all, and pairing those with some things like surveys and things like that that allow us to get a sense of what sort of impact folks are having with their work. And I think equally importantly, something that we do a lot of is really about learning cultures. And so how do you help foundations and how do you help nonprofit organizations actually learn, right? And we know that to learn, you need to acknowledge that you don't know things. You need to admit when you're making mistakes, and that can be tough for folks in an environment. And so we really help foster that. The other thing we help people do is plan. So doing strategic plannings and things like that. Again, using tools of research like interviews to be able to get a sense of what folks are thinking about where an organization or an initiative should be headed, and then compiling that into some recommendations for how to move forward. And the last thing we do is help organizations transform. And so that's really where we have a tool called the Equity Footprint. You can find it online at equityfootprint.org. That helps, in this case, foundations, but also other organizations think about the impact they're having on equity, right, across a set of domains, and then how do they transform their cultures, their systems, their practices to be able to be more effective on that. And so my work oftentimes is a mix between working with our internal teams and working directly with clients as they're going along their journeys on these various different paths.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I did put the equityfootprint.org in the chat box if anybody wants to grab that and take a look at it. Thank you so much for sharing that, and any other resource that you deem helpful, please make sure to share that as well. What can postdocs and students who would like to further their work in this field do to prepare now? Most of the folks on the call today are current students, and most of them are in the cultural anthropology program. So, what would be your best advice right now if they want to go in this direction or a similar direction outside of the academy?
Yeah, I think there's so I think it's an interesting question because I think there's like some really core skills that are super important and that you can't, it's hard to get those anywhere else in terms of really having a deep understanding of how like um, you know, social networks and groups of people and cultures work together, right? A deep understanding of like place in like what it looks like for folks that are connected to each other intimately to engage, that I think are really helpful. And I can't think of a better place to get those things. I think the biggest challenge or shift or skill to build is really in the department of writing. And so how do you, and I think, I put like communication like this in that same boat, in the sense of like really learning how to be able to communicate complicated ideas in a really simple language is a skill set that I think academic training maybe teaches you to do the opposite, take really simple ideas and make them very complicated. And so reverse engineering or unlearning some things around that I think are important skill wise. And I think a good way to do that is to do work that is more engaged and applied, where you have to just build the muscle of writing for different audiences, right? That have different expectations of things. I think things like presenting, perhaps not at an academic conference, but at a conference where you don't read from a paper, but you do some bullets to prepare well, and begin to have a conversation with folks. Those kind of skills about just communicating with people directly and clearly I think are the things that are the biggest things that I find people struggle with a little bit immediately following being part of an academic process like y'all going through, or have finished in some cases.
All right. Thank you so much. And we're coming down to our final and fifth question that is, of the format that was presented for this series. And that is, what is the employment outlook for this field given the COVID crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if you would ask me this question in March, I probably would have a different answer than I'd have today. Because I think what we experienced immediately following the COVID crisis, or the onset of it, was just things slowing down, right? So like one specific example, we had a project that we were finalists for, didn't know at the time, we'd already kind of like, we were their top choice. But they reached back out and said, we're actually pausing work on this. It was actually a pretty big project for us. And that was the most like direct example, but I feel like that was the general tenor, is that a lot of folks, there's a lot of uncertainty. Do things like racial equity still matter in a moment where people are experiencing a health crisis that is as far reaching, and an economic impact that are as far reaching as this? So that was all the sort of, the turmoil and challenge of that moment. And then the Black Lives Matter uprising happened, right? And so we went from a situation where people were saying, well, COVID is colorblind, and which is totally not true, obviously, because of the disproportionate impacts that folks have based upon their access to healthcare and what kind of job they work and all those sorts of things. But yeah, that we went from that sort of language and rhetoric and feeling, and sort of a pause in our work, and maybe some concern about us making sure we had enough work, to really just the floodgates opening up. And so we're in a situation right now where we just have significantly more opportunities to do work than we have bandwidth, time, capacity, will, sanity to do it. And so we've been actively saying no to stuff, pushing stuff off for folks that are willing to wait for us to be available, and have, a good amount of work already kind of like in the pipeline for next year. So say that to say, this moment, we've gone from, making the case for like why things like racial equality are important, and why thinking about things like patriarchy and white supremacy are important things to be thinking about as an organization, to like folks now, I think, clamoring to change and transform their organizations in a way that sometimes we're like actually asking them to slow down, because we feel like the pace they're trying to move at is just not sustainable. So that's good, for I think, both in terms of the outcomes that we want to see, and in terms of the work that we care about. But I think the thing I worry about right now is less about our specific work and our place in it, but I think just more where we are as a society, and the pace of change that we're encountering now is, I think, probably unsustainable as a country. And I think, it was already happening pretty fast, and which is, I feel like the current political moment in some ways is a backlash to that rapid change. And it's actually in the last year only accelerated, right? And so while I have like, feel pretty good about where we are as an organization and as a business, and what our opportunities are like, I'm also super concerned about this moment and what it's going to mean for like the fabric of our society as it is, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, and I feel like I should end on a high note, but I think the good news is like business is booming, and I think the challenge is like we're all trying to navigate a rapidly evolving context.
Yeah, really appreciate your answers to all of those questions. And now I want to open it up to anyone that's on the call that have some other questions that you want to, could be follow-ups to anything that Mike has already shared, or I want to invite you to unmute yourself or type in the chat. If you're not at a place where you can unmute, then I'll read it out. But Rachel, I just saw you unmute yourself, so go ahead with your question.
Thank you for this, Micah and Stacia. It's very helpful, and your last answer was pretty positive at the beginning that business is booming. I'm actually not in cultural anthropology. I'm an educational psychologist postdoc. And so one of those core areas that you mentioned, how to learn and how to, spread that information would be more applicable for me. But I was wondering, to make it more general, were there any particular roles that you feel like would be um, more popular in the next year or two with your business, or are there certain areas that people could focus on or maybe predict if you could?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that has really helped us in our development is really thinking a lot about adult educational psychology, for lack of a better word, right? In the sense of like, how do adults learn and what are the processes that help them do that? And what we know is that like, even for, it's funny when you go to, I've had the privilege of going to a few like educational conferences, right? Which look like very much like a cultural anthropology conference, and that they're very academic. People are maybe have slides, which gives you at least a visual aid, but they're definitely doing a lot of reading papers and stuff. And it's not a matter of debate that like that is not how adults learn, right? Adults learn through hands-on interaction, engagement, getting a chance to apply things, being able to reflect and think about their own practices, right? And so what we've tried to do, and we've always tried to do, and we've done it better sometimes than others, is it's just design spaces for learning that actually reflect how what the science about how adults learn, right? So lots of room for discussion, small groups, interaction, conversation, individual reflection time, those sorts of things. And so I think folks that really understand that sort of stuff, it's a really in-demand skill set, and that can point to the science of how that works, and then do it in a way that applies to people. I think is something that's super valuable. So I think there's like interesting models of that. Like, we just went through as a team Brene Brown's Dare to Lead curriculum. So I think what she's doing is a great example of she has the science around leadership and courage and vulnerability and all sorts of things that she talks about. But she's actually created a curriculum that takes all that research and distills it into really simple. I mean, my second grade son could probably read most of the materials. I don't know if he'd get all of it, but like that level of simplicity is actually a super valuable skill. And so for me as an academic, my biggest skill is not being an expert on everything or knowing all the research. I'm just not intimidated by academic writing or things like that. I can read an article and pull out what the nugget of the insight is. And I think that's the skill that I think is the one that academics are uniquely suited for, but also our training, because we're like taught you're not an expert unless you've read every single book in the field, right? Like I think it can undermine our ability to be effective in that way.
Absolutely agree. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, all right. So there's a question from Jen in the chat box, and I'll read it. She says, "Thank you, Micah. Are there opportunities for internships or remote project work that students slash postdocs could do with your organization to get more involved and also build skills?"
Yeah, so we are always looking for new folks to work with us on a part-time basis. Obviously, it varies a lot in terms of particular projects, the sort of skill sets that we need or are looking for. But yeah, we're always interested in hearing from folks. So folks that are interested, like I'd love to get your resume or something like that directly. We can follow up with you that way. In terms of full-time positions, we usually do 2 hires, or like sort of rounds of hires at least a year. So we do a fall round that's actually in the finalist stages now, and then we'll do another round that you all consider applying for in the spring, usually around March or April. So if you go to our website, Frontline SOL, short for solutions, frontlinesol.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is a good way to stay in touch. And then we also have a platform called breezy.hr. So BREEZY.hr. where I think you can sign up for notifications there when we post new positions as well. But yeah, and on top of that, just informally working on smaller projects on a project basis. We don't have a great like system for that yet. We just really like connect with us. We kind of put them in the queue, and then a few of those folks we'll reach back out to and be able to pull them into a particular product that fits their skill set.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Other questions? Jen says, great, thank you. Okay, Joseph, thanks so much for this, Stacia and Micah. I have two questions. First, I'm curious if you could elaborate on what you meant by winning the battle and losing the war. And second, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but could you comment on salary norms?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll answer the second one first because it's the simpler question. So our consultants are folks like sort of similar experience to you all. So some of them are, I think, actually, some of them have master's degrees, some of them have some graduate education, some of them just have undergraduate degree. We even have one that has a PhD, and they those salaries start at $80,000, and then we do raises as folks stay with us longer, that sort of stuff, or folks have significant experience. So that's our consultant. That's actually the most junior, I don't know what the right word is, position that we hire for now, are folks like you in the organization. In the first part, I think we really lost the conversation in the boys and men of color space around gender, right? So there was this real, my background in terms of who I was sort of raised by and read and thought about it is like definitely coming from like a feminist gender critical perspective, and really feeling like that's a really important, not only for folks that are gender nonconforming or queer or don't fit into the gender binary as easily, but also for folks that really fit into the gender binary really easily, right? Understanding how you're socialized around what it means to be a man or a boy, how understanding the way that police, male police officers interact with Black men and boys, for instance, is very gendered as well as racialized. And so we've just lost that conversation because, frankly, I think an older generation of leaders is just uncomfortable talking about gender, right? Like, they just don't think about it critically the way they think about race critically. And as a result, one, what are you talking about if you're not talking about gender outside of just cheerleading and like sort of claiming that boys are more important than girls to get resources or whatever, right? So there was that dynamic, and you just miss an opportunity to do the best work, because the best work with boys is gender informed, right? Like it is thinking about their experience of gender. So that was just one where, like, I think to move that work forward and to have a big tent and to have folks like the Obama administration involved in the work, I think we kind of like lost a little bit of things that I cared a lot about, and I think that would make the work better around being explicit about a feminist critique of gender and having that be core to the work and not an afterthought. I think folks are having that conversation now, but I think we just missed an opportunity to lead with that in some of that work. I think you're muted.
Joseph says, many thanks for these answers. I'm prepping lunch, so sorry not to turn on my camera. No problem, Joseph. Thank you for joining us today. Are there any other questions? If not, I have one that
Actually,
I think may. Oh, you do? Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. And yeah, it's not, yeah. Just thank you so much for this, Micah. I'm a second year. I'm in Joe's cohort in cultural anthropology. And I was curious when you sort of figured out, or if you were kind of balancing thoughts of working outside the academy and within the academy throughout your studies, and how you balance sort of the steps you needed to be taking toward perhaps a career in the academy versus also taking care of sort of preparatory steps toward working outside, and what recommendations you'd give for someone going through that process.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question. It's a really good question, but it's a really tough question in the sense that, like, I think it takes a lot of time, energy, effort to be able to do all that you need to do to continue on your on an academic career path. All the postdocs and fellowships and jobs and all those application processes are really extensive and demanding. And I think if you wanted to pivot to doing work similar to the kind of work that I do, like, it's a totally different set of networks, skills, relationships. And so I think there is some, I I don't know that you could do both. So the choice that I made is I kind of, a couple years into grad school, had a sense this wasn't what I wanted to do career trajectory wise. And so part of the reason why I started working on the project with Marcus and wound up helping being a co-founder at Frontline was because I knew that this wasn't, the academic journey I wanted to finish, but it wasn't the career that I was looking for. And so I actually probably could have done a better job than I did, but definitely made a decision not to apply for a lot of fellowships, a lot of jobs. I mean, I kind of opted out of that market, to be honest with you. And I think some of that was just like, some fear of failure stuff probably, but a lot of that, there was also behind that a conscious decision that I was actually heading in a different direction. I was putting energy into a different set of priorities. So yeah, but I think that's one approach. The other approach would be to really focus on your academic journey and then just be holding space and looking for opportunity to do stuff outside of it actively, right? So looking for the small consulting gig for, for X, Y, or Z, where you can mess up stuff like I did and learn from that, or looking for, or whatever, just kind of really proceeding along the academic journey and then finding opportunities to do other things. Or you could do like I did, not perhaps foolishly, but successfully, and just kind of throw all your eggs in a different trajectory, all in the basket of like a different trajectory.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
All right, as we're winding down, are there any other questions? Oh, okay, so it's one question that hasn't come up yet, but I think the answer may be of interest to other folks, is what do you enjoy best about your work and what would you change about your work, if anything?
Yeah. Actually, the thing I like most about my work is managing our staff team. Like we just have an incredible group of people here, and that I just feel like lucky to work with, and helping them grow and develop, and acknowledge and address and their challenges as leaders and as thinkers and as people. I really dig that, and I really dig the culture that we built here. Melissa, our CEO, one of my business partners, has done an incredible job of creating this environment where we are being really courageous about being honest with each other and open about what we're good at, what we're not good at, where we want to grow. And that work is like really hard and demanding, but I really, really enjoy it. I mean, the biggest thing I would just change, I mean, the hardest thing about my work is that we're working with like these big toxic, not all the time toxic, I would say, but in many cases toxic, like patriarchal white supremacist organizations where, the coin of the realm and the folks that get promoted and celebrated are folks that are, not collaborative in many cases, that are, have a lot of sort of anti-social behaviors and like microaggressive, stuff. I'm trying not to curse. I know we're recording. Microaggressive stuff that is hard to deal with. And it's hard for us to deal with, and it takes a toll on our team to deal with some of those dynamics. And it's also hard to see the impact that it's having on people in those organizations. And so I think that's the thing that's probably most challenging. The thing that I'm like at the end of the week, I'm tired from working a lot, but I'm more so like the emotional exhaustion thing is like the thing that I think is the hardest for me. I'm not a person like some people, I make the analogy. Some people can just like naturally in shape and they can just run for days. They can just take off running and never stop. And some folks like, it's like, you got to be in great shape and you got to work out real hard to be able to run. And I'm a person emotionally to really be plugged in and engaged. It just takes a lot out of me. Right. And so I think that's the thing that's the hardest for me is the way that we do our work is very connected and authentic and sincere. And it's, it's hard to do that, to maintain that over time, I would say.
Wow, so we're at time, but I don't want to leave without you being able to just leave one final nugget, Micah, with everybody that's on today. If there's just one word of wisdom or final thought that you'd like to leave as we close, I want to give you an opportunity to share that now.
Yeah, I think I would just encourage everybody just to do some work and think about and talk to anybody you can about really thinking about what would make you happy, right? I know some academics who love every aspect of their job. They love teaching, they love writing, they love every part of it, and they shouldn't be doing anything else. And I know a lot of other folks that like kind of just stayed in that lane because that was the path of least resistance, right? And so I think just doing the work of understanding what you enjoy. I mean, you've done enough of this to know what parts of it you love, what parts of it you hate, and just thinking about that without or trying to set aside the kind of like pressures of prestige and all that sort of stuff and really think about what's going to work for you. Um, and just owning your power and your privilege of, having, you got advanced degrees from some of the most some of the best universities in the world, in the country, and just owning that power and that privilege, and that you have the ability to really choose your destiny, I think is what I'd say.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for joining us. As I said at the beginning, this event is being recorded, and it will be available on the Postdoc YouTube channel at some point in the near future. Thanks everybody for having a few minutes with us, and have a good afternoon. Thanks again, Micah.
All right. Thank you all.